Right, good afternoon. Welcome everybody to this webinar run by the Emergency Planning College and Save the Children UK. It's an opportunity to reflect on the very successful national seminar we ran back at the end of November, entitled Neither Seen Nor Heard, which looked at the unique needs of children and young people in emergencies and disasters in the UK. My name's David Mellor. I'm a lecturer at the Emergency Planning College. I'm also an independent chair of a Safeguarding Children Board in the northwest of England.
Hello everyone, my name's Daniel Dumbarton. I am the UK Domestic Emergency Planning Manager for Save the Children UK, and along with David I'll be co-leading this webinar. Just a few housekeeping issues first of all, for those that have already dialed in. If you could have a look at the top of your screen, you'll see a green box that should say viewing EPC, etc. If you could just click on that, and then that will come down as such, and in that you'll see a few boxes. If you have any questions that you want to put to us, could you please pick the chat box, and then when the chat box opens, you'll have another drop-down menu inside the box that says send to. Could you please pick all panelists? That way everybody can see the question that you've asked, and it makes it a little bit more interactive for us. Also, what I would like to point out at this time is that you're all muted. That's not because we don't want to hear from you, that's just so that we can manage this a little bit easier and make sure that we don't overtalk each other and that questions are given to us in a manner that we can do in an organised kind of way. As we go through the session, if you've got questions, please use the chat box again to deliver those questions. And if you've got something that is really pertinent to the topic that we're on at the time and the slide that we're on, we'll try and answer it at that particular point, but if not, we'll try and do that at the end of the session.
Okay, thanks Dan. Let's get into the webinar now and just reflect for a minute or two on how it all began. And it all began with missing children, not in the sense of children missing from home or school or anything, but missing from national policy documents, national guidance. For those of you from a background in emergency management and UK resilience, you'll know that the key national documents are emergency preparedness and emergency response and recovery. And if you have a good look through those two very substantial and weighty and very well-regarded documents, you'll find very few mentions of the needs of children and young people at all. There's no explicit reference to protecting or safeguarding children, and they feature just slightly more frequently than household pets. So we noticed that children and young people weren't getting a look in national guidance. So we felt that some kind of response was required to that situation. And just over a year ago, we ran a webinar here at the college, which highlighted these omissions of children, and also noted that at a local level there was some superb good practice, but it was largely led by highly motivated individuals rather than an attempt to try and join up the resilience agenda locally with the safeguarding children agenda locally. Simultaneously, Save the Children UK was developing services for children and young people in the UK, drawing on their very substantial international experience of supporting children and young people in disasters and emergencies in a range of locations abroad. And so it just seemed a natural and intelligent fit to join up the Emergency Planning College and Save the Children. And we came up with the idea of organising this national seminar, Neither Seen Nor Heard, which, as I say, ran at the end of November last year. It was the first national seminar in the UK to focus exclusively the needs of children and young people in emergencies. Good attendance, over 60 people from a very wide range of agencies, primarily from a resilience background, but also from education and safeguarding children backgrounds. There was a real buzz over the 2 days we ran the seminar, real enthusiasm for identifying what the gaps were in terms of services for children and young people in emergencies and disasters in the UK, and how we might best address them.
As David said, it was the first seminar of its kind to exclusively focus on children and young people. But what made it kept the buzz alive really, and really pushed this agenda forward, was that we had our young leaders there, not all of them, just to put a little bit of context and background to it. Our young leaders, the Save Children young leaders, are a group of about 46 young people ranging from about 12 to 21 years old, who do a range of things and get fully involved within the Save the Children movement. And then within that, they pick certain modules. Within those 48, 16 of them picked emergencies as one of their modules to kind of concentrate on. So at the conference itself, we had them fully involved. They fully participated. They got involved with the workshops. They helped deliver, actually speak and become part of the panel, and basically harassed some of the delegates to get their pledges, which we'll go on about later. Harass is probably the wrong word, actually. The session run by the Children's Commissioner was of particular note for the young people themselves, because they really, really did engage with her. And they really did encourage, like I said, the attendees to pledge to do something as a result of the seminar. And it's really had a profound effect on the seminar itself. It was, rather than just a seminar talking about children and young people, it was a seminar that involved children and young people about their issues. They had a lot to say, as you can quite imagine, from teenagers, but it was all very constructive, and it was really well received. They thought it was the first step, must be turned into action. They were really excited about the opportunities that had been given and being able to give their views. They were sometimes less comfortable talking about issues than others within the group, but I think that's what you get with young people across the board. As I already mentioned, the Children's Commissioner for them was a real highlight. She really did make them feel that they were being listened to, and she was extremely enthusiastic about taking this subject matter forward. They did feel that their involvement should be the norm and rather than the exception, and I think they put that message across really quite eloquently and constructively, and they didn't want people to pretend that they were just listening to them. They just wanted it to be the norm. So we also had a wide range of speakers, all obviously focusing on children and young people in emergencies. So what we'll do is we'll start at the top from left to right. Jessie Burton was from Save the Children USA, and her focus was primarily around psychosocial recovery, but she also discussed the history of Save the Children in the USA and how they actually were thrown in at the fore in and amongst Hurricane Katrina, and how they really developed themselves and worked alongside FEMA, which is kind of like the United States version of the Cabinet Office.
Yeah, Maggie Atkinson, we've already heard mention of her role as Children's Commissioner. Real highlight for the Save the Children Young leaders. Maggie's the second Children's Commissioner for England. It's a fairly recent innovation as a post, but it's essentially a focus for ensuring that the rights of children and the voices of children are heard in all policy forums across the country. And it was a real boost to the seminar that Maggie was able to join us. And Maggie really made delegates think about the impact of emergency situations on children and young people by giving us some really riveting case studies. And then she ran a session where she brought the Save the Children young leaders onto the stage with her and facilitated a superb back and forth discussion between the young leaders and those attending the seminar. Rosanna Briggs is well known to many, many people in the field of emergency management. She's developed some really innovative methods for engaging with pupils in schools. And probably the most well-known product that she's developed is the What If product, which has won a national award.
And next on that list there, as you can already see, is myself, along with a colleague of mine, Sarah. The primary objective of our session was to really highlight to the participants and delegates alike the great work that's already been undertaken out there. And as David already mentioned, Rosanna is at the fore of that. But there are some other great examples, and I'm not going to go too heavily into them because they feature later on, but that includes Cornwall County Council, Hampshire, and numerous others who are doing some excellent work at the local level to, one, raise awareness and bring to the fore the need for emergency preparedness for children and young people. But the other side of that is the participatory side of that, and getting children and young people actually involved in the planning and not always seeing them as victims or obstacles.
Yeah, finally, Hugh and Marion are researchers who've done some wonderful research on the impact of flooding on communities and the impact on children and young people. And their presentation really opened, I think, attendees' minds up to the potentially very substantial impact that emergencies, in this case flooding, can have on children and young people, and how through disrupting their lives for not insubstantial periods of time and disrupting their education, they can really have quite a long-term impact on the life chances of children and young people. So quite a profound presentation, that one.
Thanks, David. What we're going to do now is just go over some of the workshops that were run over the 2 days. These were running in between the main speaker sessions, and there were 3 key ones. We use Write the Policy, Inclusive Emergency Planning, and Impact of Bereavement.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm just going to talk about the first workshop. And as I just talk about it, we're going to try and ask you some questions about what you think about each of the workshops as we go. So as I just start talking about what came out of this workshop, you write the policy. If any thoughts occur to you, any questions occur to you, please just start texting those to us, and we'll try and deal with them as we go. However, if that experiment doesn't work, there's no problem. We'll pick up on any issues or questions you've got about each of the workshops at the end of the presentation. But this workshop was in recognition of the fact that, as I said earlier, children and young people are missing from national policy guidance. So participants in the 2 iterations of the workshop were asked to think about how they might rewrite those key national policies to ensure that the needs of children and young people were met. And here are some of the key points which emerged. The importance of engaging with central government, particularly the owners of the policy documents I mentioned earlier, such as the Cabinet Office, also the Department for Education, because of the idea that you can see in that orange bubble of looking to influence the school curriculum to try and include elements of emergency preparedness in that school curriculum, and also the Department for Communities and Local Government. People felt that it would be a good idea to try and keep the Children's Commissioner involved, and I'm pleased to be able to say that we've had further contact with the Children's Commissioner since the seminar. She is keen to help us, and she would be a very good advocate for this area as we seek to influence the centre. It was suggested that we should kick off with some kind of gap analysis, analysing what is currently available, what services are currently available, what policies have currently been written to try and address the needs of children and young people, identify where the gaps are, and then start to identify ways in which those gaps might be filled. It was felt that the voice of children and young people was currently not being heard in LRS or local resilience forums. That's where the planning for emergency takes place across the country, and that LRS, Local Resilience Forum, needed to engage with children using existing structures in which children are currently consulted, and that the National Recovery Working Group needed to have the needs of children and young people on their agenda, particularly in the light of the findings reported earlier by Hugh and Marion. And this group also felt that in emergencies there was a role for a dedicated person to track the needs of children and the extent to which they were being met throughout the response and the recovery phase. So let's try this now. Here's some questions about this first workshop. Any thoughts on these policy ideas? Do you think they make sense or not? Could they be improved on? And what do you think of the idea of having a national working group to look at the needs of children in emergency? And if we are successful in establishing a national working group, what might it focus on in your view? Okay, so those are the questions. I'm going to leave them hanging there to see whether there are any contributions anyone wants to make at this stage. This is a bit of a controlled experiment. I'm just talking to the screen now, and I'm hoping that one or two questions or observations might pop up. But if they don't, if we're not able to do that sufficiently quickly, then in a moment or two we'll move on and deal with your questions as they crop up.
Okay. What we have here is a question from Neil. I'm sorry, I don't have you on my list of delegates from the pre-list, Neil, so I can't see where you're from. But you've asked whether the Children's Commissioner for Scotland has engaged with this agenda. Not at the moment, and to be honest, we haven't done that either, but what we have done is been heavily involved with RABS VS, that's the Resilience Advisory Board voluntary sector for Scotland. And one of the exciting things that they're doing in Scotland is that we're working with Education Scotland to really embed emergency preparedness, disaster risk reduction, whatever you want to call it, into schools. And that's a work in progress. In terms of the Children's Commission, that will certainly be something that we'll be looking at. It's a very, very good idea, and it's probably a slight oversight from ourselves, but I think in slight defence of that, it was just a case of there was a clear linkage between contacts with the Children's Commissioner, for example.
And the Children's Commissioner, there's a separate Children's Commissioner for Wales as well, so that's a good thought. Thank you very much for that.
And then there's another one here from Robert. Excellent idea to involve young people at school stages. I'm part of the Community Resilience Group in Hampshire. We completely agree. We did an exercise called Exercise Fire Blast coming back to the summer of last year, which involved the Met Police, Islington Borough Council, London Fire Brigade, David here himself, and there was another one that I'm struggling to remember who it was, and our young leaders, which was fantastic. And I think what came away from that was the professionals from the police, fire, councils, etc., were really amazed at how logical, how sensible, how well thought out the responses that the young people actually doing the exercise was. And they've got a lot to actually offer. Some more questions coming in, picking fast to be quite honest.
Thank you very much for these questions. Any more you want to deal with at this stage, Dan?
Yes, there's some more ideas coming in from Neil, which I think is fantastic. I'm not going to go through those at the moment, but I may follow up with you if that's okay, Neil, later on, if you could give me your email address, etc. And Marion is stressing the importance to think about education policy, taking into account long-term disruption and displacement, which is a really good point. And what I'm going to do later on, if at all possible, is when we put this on the website later, because this webinar will be on the website sometime next week, is that I'll also put up a link to a recent piece of Marion's work which looks at the long-term disruption and displacement of children and young people in emergencies. And then somebody stressing that they don't see children and young people that much in emergencies. but we'll certainly follow up on that one there, vulnerable in a crisis. We're going to.
Okay, thank you very much for those contributions. The controlled experiment seems to be working. We're going to move on now to for Dan just to talk about the second workshop we ran.
So this one was around inclusive emergency planning, and this workshop was led by a colleague of mine, Ginny House. In this, they explored and considered ways in which children and young people could be involved in emergency management. And as already mentioned, one of the ways is to conduct exercises, but not to do it in a way where they're seen as the victims, but actually to get them participating in the decision-making function at the strategic and tactical level within obviously a very controlled environment. It's amazing how both sides of the fence, both the professionals and the children and young people, really get involved with this. As I said, exercises, identifying planning gaps, using existing fora was another one. So I believe most local authorities have children's council or youth councils, youth parliaments, and utilising an existing forum is a low-cost or no-cost solution in actually achieving some of this participatory engagement strands of involving children and young people in emergency. And one of the other things that came out quite a lot from the delegates was getting out the emergency planning silo, which seems to happen quite often, and engaging with others, not just in children's and youth groups. It was recognised that sometimes the emergency planning profession can be quite siloed within their own Cat 1, Cat 2 environment. So once again, the next slide is going to prompt hopefully some questions or ideas. Is there an appetite to engage with children and young people? I think from some of the things that are coming through on the chat board, there certainly is. Do you currently engage with children and young people? As again, from the chats, we can already see that people do. Can you see a role for them in planning, response and recovery? Are there barriers to engagement, and what do you need to increase your engagement? One of the things that we did find from this workshop was that amongst the professionals, there was a distinct idea that they should be doing it, and it wasn't that they were scared of doing it, it's that they felt they didn't have the skills to actually do this. And one of the things that was sort of raised was if you use these existing forums, there was already a professional that's assigned to that forum that can help that engagement process, so that once again it's not a hugely onerous task to get these solutions up and running. So at the moment we haven't got any questions coming through to this. But what I would ask is if people do have solutions or are undertaking things, that they actually share that amongst the group through this chat board, so that we can really push the agenda through.
Okay, thanks, Dan. The third workshop was run by an expert, qualified social worker called Rachel Fernley, who is a published author on the impact of bereavement on children and young people. And what she did was something quite special, really. She took her work looking at the impact of bereavement on children and young people, and she tried to show how some of the skills required in supporting and communicating with children and young people in that particular personal emergency, where they are experiencing the bereavement of a family member or a close friend, and to try and extrapolate the skills and the approaches required from that personal emergency to an emergency management situation. And the two runnings of the workshops were very well attended, very well engaged. And some of the points that emerged from that workshop were that although the needs of children and young people in a personal emergency, such as bereavement, are broadly similar to adults, for example, they need clear information, people being straight with them, and also ample opportunity to explore their feelings. There were some risks that these needs might be overlooked, or for adults to decide in quite a paternal sort of way that it's better for them not to be included in what is happening. So quite a profound workshop there. And again, we're just posing a couple of questions to you. Do you think that the emotional and psychological needs of children and young people are adequately met in the recovery phase? Any views on that? And is there a need for general and recovery-based emotional resilience building? I think they're two quite profound questions, so I think rather than waiting at this stage for comments, perhaps you can be thinking about those questions, and if you've got any thoughts on those, we'll pick them up when we get through to the plenary at the end. Okay, Dan.
Okay, so aside from the normal things that you have at a seminar, like at the workshop and the speakers, we also set up a room of requirement. And those of you who are fans of Harry Potter will know exactly what the room of requirement is. In essence, for the purposes of our seminar, it was a place where we could really, not being in an area where it's either a workshop or a speaker speaking or asking questions, it was an area where people could really engage with each other. What we did was we used the room to showcase some of that work that I already mentioned earlier on, like the what if, the stuff done by Great Yarmouth, County Council, Cornwall and the Scout groups, and Hampshire, etc. We really used this as an opportunity for people to both physically and using a projector and the web to showcase some of this stuff. One of the other things that we had in there was Dr. Marion Walker, who's one of our delegates for the webinar, and her study, which I think goes back to the previous slide about the long-term recovery. And like I said, I will put a link on the college's website so that you can go straight to that report and to the short film they did recently. It gave the participants, the young leaders and the speakers, a place to discuss what's in place and what's missing. It was a really good opportunity to do this in an informal manner where people could be really relaxed and be quite free about if they had a question that they wanted some help with, they didn't feel that it was they were no way going to be scrutinised. And it also gave the young leaders an excellent opportunity to engage with some of the professionals. We also used and they're not my pants, by the way, we also used that room to showcase the pledges that the delegates or participants were actually doing over the 2 days. We used this in the form of a washing line, obviously to symbolise flooding, and pants, socks, vests, etc. were used as receptacles to place the pledges on. And as you can see there, this is talking about learning and trying to join up the agenda across their organisation with the external partners in terms of children and young people. So it was a great place and a really interesting arena for people. Yeah,
we had a very large number of pledges. The overwhelming majority of attendees to the seminar made pledges. I just did an analysis of the main issues which cropped up on the pledges, which is shown on this slide. Quite a lot of delegates resolved to go back to their own areas and take a fresh look at their emergency plans to ensure that the needs of children were fully addressed. That's a really positive thing, and it may be that by revising their emergency plans locally, that'll be the start of some practice which can inform developments at a national level. As we've already mentioned, there are numerous existing fora which exist to consult children on a range of issues in local areas. And why reinvent the wheel when those existing fora exist, where they're facilitated by people with really good professional skills and experience in consulting children and young people. So a lot of delegates said they were going to go back and use those existing forums. Engaging more constructively with schools was a very popular one. I think that schools and pupils within those schools are a key part of building community resilience. And several people, just picking up a point from earlier about breaking out of the emergency planning silo, wanted to explore how the emergency planning and preparedness agenda and the agenda for keeping children and young people safe from a whole range of risks, such as physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, and so on and so forth, how those two agendas might be joined up, because they have got quite a lot in common. Their overriding aim of both the resilience and the safeguarding agenda is to help protect and safeguard people who might be vulnerable. And also, there was a strong thrust to take the information gained from the seminar and disseminate it more widely.
So what we'll do now is just briefly go over what the next steps, we feel what the next steps are going to be or should be. One of the clear things that came from the participants, the young leaders and the speakers themselves was the need for a national working group. So that was around advocating for including children and young people in emergency planning, response and recovery, and including that actually in a national curriculum. It's really clear that, you know, for societal change and being more resilient at that community level, educating children in this is extremely important in that. There's numerous studies to show that, you know, educating children is a way of actually increasing societal change or getting societal change. What we want to do is also produce a clear, evidence-based and easy-to-use national guidance, which is built upon the great local work that's already being done, and actually just picking up on some of the gaps in terms of psychosocial recovery in the long-term disruption and displacement, and also by doing that, to address the absence of children from national plans. As part of this webinar and part of the seminar, we've produced a report in partnership with the college, which we'll be putting online as well. And part of that is a letter which we are encouraging people to read, and if they agree to actually follow the guidance in that, and how they can actually send that back to us so that we can push this forward to the Cabinet Office Minister responsible, so that we can actually get this national working group endorsed by the appropriate person.
Yeah, and just finalising the comments about next steps, there's a real buzz at the seminar. It was certainly the most exciting and innovative seminar I think I've been involved in my career, and no doubt that was in part down to the presence of the Save the Children young leaders. But what a lot of those who attended the seminar said was, we mustn't let this slip. We've built up this enthusiasm through the seminar. We've got to keep the pot boiling, so to speak. So that is what we're going to try our very best to do. This webinar today, we'll be repeating it today at 4 o'clock as well, is part of that idea of keeping things going. So we'd like to promote the sharing of ideas, raising of questions and challenges via the I Learn section of the Emergency Planning College website. You can easily gain access to that and contribute to that. If you've any problems with that, then Dan and I will be able to assist you with that subsequently. And we also want to know what people are doing in their own areas. All these people going back and reviewing their policies. Let's hear about good practice. Let's hear about what people are doing to fulfil their pledges. For example, my pledge, I'm an independent chair of a Safeguarding Children board in Stockport in Greater Manchester. My pledge was to see if I could join up the safeguarding agenda in Greater Manchester, of which I'm a part, with the local resilience forum. So I took a paper just suggesting ways in which we might join these two agendas up. For example, local safeguarding children boards could quality assure emergency plans to check that the needs of children and young people were being fully addressed. And the local Safeguarding Partnership for Greater Manchester has agreed to all of that and has now written to the local resilience forum, proposing that I be a representative on that forum to represent the Safeguarding Children agenda. So we'll be looking to hear from all those who made pledges, to hear what they've been getting up to and what progress they've made. Okay, so that is just about the end of the formal presentation part of the webinar. So in the time that remains to us, we'd like to invite you now in the next 10, 15, 20 minutes, however long, to submit any questions or comments or observations by text, as you did do earlier, and Dan and I will do our best to either answer them now or get back to you subsequently. So the ball's in your court. Let's look forward to hearing from you over the next few minutes.
Okay, we've got a few sort of points and questions that had already been raised. Neil mentioned around utilising and employing social networking as a means for communicating, disseminating information to children and young people. This is something that we actually found from the children and young people themselves out of exercise Fire Blast, I put my teeth back in, was that they brought that up themselves. They felt that had they been part of this decision-making process, not quite literally at the gold table, but slightly further down the chain, that they could actually, within their peer groups, actually disseminate some really useful information as a means for identifying those within their own section, whether they were vulnerable or not, and just getting messages across. So it's a really good point. One I probably should have mentioned was earlier on, social networking. Marianne also stressed the need for safeguarding children and resilience to be joined up and to make sure that there were people talking together. And I think it was Ellie, let me just go back through the board. It said about children being mentioned within national guidance in the identifying people who are vulnerable in a crisis, which is a great document, and it does mention children in there. And yes, we really do agree that it's one of those areas where it definitely should be included. But we feel that obviously there's need for further work on these national guidance and national policy. Okay. Do we have any more questions from people out there? Give people a couple of minutes to perhaps type things out.
Any thoughts on the national working group that we are proposing to be a focus for this area of work at the national level?
So another comment here from Ellie about joining up with the National Recovery Working Group, and haven't we done this yet via the CCS? Not completely, but we do work quite closely with them in other areas, and it obviously be part of our workload going forward with the colleagues from the CCS. But yeah, very valid point.
Okay, we're open to anything else you might like to contribute.
Yes, Ellie's actually just mentioned that she can help with this. What would be great if you could, I'm just going to see which would be the best way of sharing your contact details with me, so that we can link up after this.
Email address.
Is it possible that you could put your, send your email address via the chat? If you want to keep your email private, you can always just do it to pick from the drop-down bar the host, and then we will only see it if you want to keep that private. This is my first time doing a webinar, so this is rather difficult to gauge when people are finished asking questions or not.
Whilst you're considering asking questions or raising issues, we realise that children and young people are not the only vulnerable group in emergencies and disasters, and we'll be running another webinar in April, looking at the needs of adults at risk in emergencies. So those adults who might become vulnerable by age or illness or disability. So that's something that I'm just flagging up for us later on in the year.
Neil's just mentioned there about Northern Ireland. We already do quite a lot of work with Northern Ireland, and we mainly it's Belfast City Council. We have a programme which we're developing, and again we've been utilising Marianne's expertise to help develop that. a psychosocial recovery program, which is used across the globe. It's called Journey of Hope, and we're actually working with some psychologists who are highly experienced and highly professional trauma psychologists from Northern Ireland to help adapt that to the Northern Ireland post-conflict context for the children and young people over there. And it's a really exciting program, and it's a really exciting time for Northern Ireland in terms of this program. So thanks for that, Neil. And Neil, sorry. And Marion's put her email address on there, which I presume is so that people can contact her if they're interested in finding out some more about her great project after the floods. And he's privately sent us that one. So someone's not going to ring. Brilliant. So unless there's any other questions, we'll draw this session to a close. Like we already said, it's being recorded, so the slides and the voice will be available middle to the end of next week, and I believe the slides separately. So if you want to take those off, please do. And obviously, if you want my contact details, if you haven't already provided your own, I would be happy to give those as well.
And the same goes for me. Thanks very much for signing up to the webinar. Thanks for the comments, some smashing ideas. One of the great things about this area of work is that there's huge scope for development, and it's great to get ideas from people working in the field or interested in this area. So many thanks for your contributions, everyone.
I'd just like to close before everybody goes off, is that some of our young leaders are coming to the end of their time with us. One of the interesting things that we found through our engagement, both in the seminar and our exercise, is that people, once they've worked with the young leaders, is that they want to do more. We're looking for some innovative ways that they can continue their work in the emergency planning field. So if anybody's got any options or ideas on how they can continue this forward, whether that's internship, etc., please do get in touch with us. Okay, right, we'll call a halt to the webinar. Thank you very much for your contribution, and look forward to making contact with you and working with you in the future. Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.